Stop buying these. 9 tin tomato brands UK experts say to avoid what if one of the most common ingredients in your kitchen wasn't as safe as you thought. A simple tin of tomatoes. Cheap. Convenient. Harmless. Or at least, that's what millions of UK shoppers believe. But over the past year, food inspectors, supply chain analysts, and supermarket auditors have quietly raised concerns about something most people never think to question. Because behind the bright labels and glossy supermarket shelves, some tin tomato products may not contain exactly what you think they do. Hidden additives. Questionable sourcing. And in some cases, tomatoes that have traveled thousands of miles before reaching your plate. Tonight, we're uncovering 9 tin tomato brands that UK experts say shoppers should think twice about buying. And before you assume this doesn't affect you, ask yourself one question. How often do you use tin tomatoes? In pasta? In curries? In soups? In chili? For many families, it's every single week. So what if the tin you trust the most is one of the worst? Let's find out. 2. Extension INTRO tin tomatoes are one of the most widely sold grocery items in the United Kingdom. Every year, millions of tins move through major supermarkets like Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Aldi. They are cheap. They last for years. And they form the base of countless home-cooked meals. But what many shoppers don't realize is that not all tin tomatoes are created equal. Behind the scenes, the global tomato industry has become one of the most complex and controversial food supply chains in the world. Some tomatoes are grown in ideal Mediterranean conditions. Others are mass-produced in huge industrial farms where quality control becomes far more difficult. Then there's the issue of processing. Some tins contain nothing more than tomatoes and juice. Others contain added acidity regulators, flavor enhancers, or stabilizers. And occasionally, something even more questionable. Over the past few months, several UK food analysts have quietly flagged concerns about certain supermarket tomato products. Low tomato content, inconsistent quality, and suspiciously low prices that raise an uncomfortable question. How can some brands sell a full tin of tomatoes for less than the cost of growing them? Tonight, we're breaking down 9 tin tomato brands experts say you should think twice about buying. But one of them might surprise you. Because it's sitting in thousands of British kitchens right now. 3. Body, the investigation. Section 1, the hidden tomato supply chain. Before we talk about specific brands, you need to understand something important. Most tin tomatoes sold in the UK are not grown in Britain. They are imported. Large volumes come from Italy, Spain, and increasingly China, where tomatoes are processed into paste and then reconstituted during packaging. This doesn't automatically mean they are unsafe. But it does mean something else. Traceability becomes much harder. Once tomatoes are processed into concentrate, shipped across continents, and then repackaged under supermarket labels, it becomes difficult to know exactly where they came from. And that's where problems can start to appear. Food inspectors across Europe have occasionally flagged issues such as excess water content, low-grade tomatoes used in processing tomato paste diluted and resold as premium products, and that brings us to the first brand experts say shoppers should examine more carefully. Section 2, Brand Breakdown begins. Brand number 1, Stockwell Co. This is one of the lowest priced tomato tins commonly found in Tesco. Budget shoppers love it. But some analysts say the extremely low price raises concerns about tomato quality and sourcing transparency. The issue isn't necessarily safety. It's consistency. Food reviewers frequently report tins containing excess liquid soft, broken tomatoes, weaker flavor, which suggests lower grade tomatoes may be used during processing. But things get more interesting with the next brand. Brand number 2, Essential Waitrose. This one surprises people. Because Waitrose is often associated with higher quality food. However, some consumer taste panels have noted that their basic tomato tins sometimes contain more juice than actual tomato flesh. That means you may be paying for a tin that's partially diluted. Not dangerous. But not exactly premium either. And if you cook regularly, you'll notice the difference immediately. But the third brand raised an entirely different concern. Brand number 3, Happy Harvest, sold by Aldi. This budget option has attracted attention because of inconsistent batch quality. Some tins taste rich and balanced. Others, noticeably watery. Food supply analysts say this can happen when tomato sourcing changes between harvest seasons. In other words, two identical tins could come from completely different farms. And that inconsistency matters more than most shoppers realize. Because when tomato quality drops, manufacturers often compensate with processing tricks. And that leads to the next brand. Section 3, Processing Tricks. Brand number 4, Smart Price. This extremely cheap option from Asda often costs far less than competing brands. But experts say ultra-low prices sometimes mean higher water content and lower tomato concentration. Which means your pasta sauce might require 2 tins instead of 1. Saving money suddenly becomes an illusion. But something else in the industry raises even bigger questions. Tomato paste dilution. And one brand in particular has been criticized for it. Brand number 5, Sainsbury's Basics. Found in Sainsbury's, this entry-level product occasionally receives complaints about weak flavor and thin texture. Food reviewers suspect some tins may rely heavily on reconstituted tomato concentrate. This isn't illegal, but it does change the quality dramatically. And if you're cooking dishes like spaghetti bolognese or chili con carne, the difference becomes obvious. But the next brand raised concerns for a completely different reason. Section 4, Imported Paste Controversy. Brand number 6, Chef's Larder. Often sold through catering suppliers, this brand is widely used in restaurants and takeaways. The issue? Some analysts say bulk tomato products in this category may contain globally sourced tomato paste blended together. That means tomatoes grown in multiple countries could end up in the same tin. Again, not necessarily unsafe. But transparency becomes murky. And for consumers who care about origin and farming standards, that matters. But now we reach one of the most controversial brands on the list. Section 5, The Italian Label Illusion. Brand number 7, Napolina. Italian branding sells. And Napolina markets itself heavily around Italian heritage. But food analysts point out something many shoppers miss. Packed in Italy doesn't always mean grown in Italy. In some cases, tomato products can be processed in Italy using tomatoes imported from other countries. This has sparked debates across the European food industry. Because consumers often assume Italian equals premium. But that assumption doesn't always hold up. And the next brand proves why. Brand number 8, Sirio. Once considered a premium Italian brand, Sirio has occasionally faced criticism from food reviewers over variations in tomato sweetness and acidity levels. That could suggest mixed tomato varieties or inconsistent harvesting. Again, it's not necessarily unsafe. But when you're paying a premium, expectations are higher. And that brings us to the final brand. Brand number 9, Mutti. This one shocks people. Because Mutti is widely considered one of the best tomato brands in Europe. So why mention it here? Not because of safety concerns, but because experts warn that counterfeit or imitation Mutti products occasionally appear in global supply chains. Rare, but real. Which means buying from reputable retailers becomes essential. Because if the price seems too good to be true, it probably is. 4. Shocking revelations. The biggest surprise in this investigation isn't that some tomato tins are lower quality. It's how little most shoppers know about the tomato supply chain. The truth is, some tomato tins contain far more water than tomatoes. Some rely heavily on reconstituted paste. Some change tomato sources between batches, and none of this is obvious from the label. Which means the average shopper is making decisions based on branding, not information. And that's exactly how the industry prefers it. 5. Solutions. What should you buy instead? So what can you do? Food experts recommend a few simple strategies. 1. Look for ingredient simplicity. The best tins usually contain just tomatoes, tomato juice, nothing else. 2. Check tomato origin. If origin matters to you, look for labels that clearly state where tomatoes were grown. 3. Avoid ultra-cheap options. If a tin costs dramatically less than competitors, ask why. 4. Try whole plum tomatoes. They are often made with higher quality fruit, because broken tomatoes can't be hidden. 6. Powerful OUTRO. At the end of the day, tin tomatoes are still one of the most useful ingredients in any kitchen. But like many mass-produced foods, not every option is equal. Some are rich, sweet, and full of flavor. Others are watered down, inconsistent, or sourced in ways most shoppers never realize. And now that you know what to look for, the next time you reach for a tin on the supermarket shelf, you might pause, turn the label, and ask a simple question. What's really inside this tin? If this investigation helped you see your supermarket shop differently, now here's something most shoppers never see. Before many food products reach supermarket shelves in the UK, they go through quality testing, acidity levels, salt balance, microbial safety. But occasionally, independent consumer groups run their own tests. And that's where things sometimes become uncomfortable. In several past product comparisons, analysts discovered that some budget tomato tins contain significantly more liquid than expected. In other words, you weren't buying a tin full of tomatoes. You were buying a tin partly filled with tomato-flavored water. To the average shopper, that difference is invisible. But to chefs, food scientists, and experienced cooks, it's obvious the moment the tin is opened. The tomatoes collapse too easily. The sauce looks thin. And the flavor? Weak. But the real question isn't just quality. It's how these products are made so cheaply in the first place. And to understand that, we need to look at the global tomato industry. Section 7. The global tomato machine. Tomatoes are one of the most traded agricultural products on Earth. Huge industrial farms stretch across parts of Italy, Spain, and other major growing regions. Harvest season can look like something from a factory. Massive machines roll across fields, collecting thousands of kilograms of tomatoes per hour. Those tomatoes are then sent to processing plants where they are turned into tomato paste, tomato pulp, and diced tomato products. But here's where things get interesting. Tomato paste is incredibly concentrated. So concentrated, in fact, that manufacturers can store it for months, ship it around the world, and later rehydrate it to produce different tomato products. Which means the tomatoes in your tin might not have been diced yesterday. They could have been paste processed months ago, diluted later, and then packaged under a supermarket brand. Again, this isn't illegal. But it's something most consumers never realize. And it explains why some tomato tins taste dramatically different from others. Because when tomatoes are processed fresh, the flavor stays vibrant. When they are reconstituted from paste, something changes. And that brings us to another issue experts sometimes warn about. Section 8, THE, Italian, label that misleads shoppers. Walk through any UK supermarket aisle and you'll see something interesting. Many tomato tins feature Italian flags, Mediterranean imagery, traditional Italian branding. Why? Because shoppers associate Italy with high-quality tomatoes. And to be fair, Italy does produce some of the best tomatoes in the world. But there's a catch. Under certain regulations, a product can sometimes be labeled, packed in Italy, even if the tomatoes themselves were sourced elsewhere. That doesn't mean the product is fake. But it does mean the story on the label may not be the full story. And when brands rely heavily on marketing rather than transparency, experts say shoppers should pay closer attention. Especially when prices vary so dramatically between brands that appear almost identical. But tomato quality isn't the only thing that affects the final product. There's another factor most shoppers never consider. Section 9, WHY whole plum tomatoes are often better. Here's a trick professional chefs know well. When buying tin tomatoes, whole plum tomatoes are often the safest choice. Why? Because broken or lower quality tomatoes can easily be hidden in diced or crushed products. But whole tomatoes are different. You can see them. Their size, their texture, their color. If the tomatoes inside a tin look firm and vibrant, chances are the quality is higher. Many chefs actually buy whole plum tomatoes and crush them by hand when cooking. It takes seconds. But the flavor difference can be huge. Which leads to a simple rule many food experts follow. Avoid tins that look too cheap to be true. Because when it comes to tomatoes, quality almost always reflects the ingredients used. Section 10. How to spot a better tin next time you are standing in the supermarket tomato aisle. Try this simple checklist. First, check the ingredient list. The best tins usually contain just two things: tomatoes, tomato juice. If you see long lists of stabilizers or additives, it's worth asking why. Second, look at the tomato style. Whole plum tomatoes tend to be higher quality than diced products. Third, compare the liquid. When you open the tin, the tomatoes should look rich and thick, not watery. Fourth, pay attention to price. Extremely cheap tomato tins often rely on lower-grade fruit or diluted paste. Sometimes spending just 20 or 30 pence more dramatically improves quality. Section 11. The real takeaway. So after everything we've uncovered, what's the real lesson here? It's not that every budget tomato tin is bad. And it's not that every premium brand is perfect. The truth is much simpler. The global tomato industry is huge. And like any massive industry, quality varies. Some brands focus on flavor and sourcing. Others focus on keeping prices as low as possible. But once you understand the difference, shopping becomes easier. Because instead of grabbing the first tin you see, you start reading the label. You start noticing the ingredients. And suddenly, that humble tin of tomatoes becomes a much more informed choice. Powerful final outro the next time you're cooking pasta, chili, or a homemade tomato sauce. Take a moment before you open the tin. Look at the label. Because the difference between a great tomato dish and a disappointing one often starts right there. Inside a small metal tin most people never question. If this investigation opened your eyes to what might really be hiding in your supermarket trolley, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who cooks regularly. Because the next everyday product we investigate might already be sitting in your kitchen cupboard. And once you see it, you might never shop the same way again.